Booster ignition and liftoff.
In 1981, the space shuttle made a surprising discovery. Using a new type of radar, NASA took a 30-mile wide scan of the Sahara Desert. The radar pierced the sand to a depth of 16 feet and revealed what looked like a hidden network of ancient waterways crisscrossing the desert. This finding stumped scientists. 3 million years ago, the Sahara turned from rainforest into desert. Now it seemed that it had been home to a lot of water at some point in the following 3 million years. Researchers followed the NASA images north into Tunisia, to the edge of a deep depression in the Sahara, the site of their first clue.
This is what we're looking for. Got some quite intact shells here. This deposit is largely composed of intact shells.
And these are not shells from the ocean.
So here we have half of a cadastroderma glaucum shell, which is a clear sign of a freshwater lake. This is just one example of what must be millions of shells. We must be somewhere near the shoreline of the lake here.
Further shell deposits reveal that this lake was giant, about the size of West Virginia. But the shells provide even more remarkable evidence: the date when this lake existed. Carbon dating puts them at 90,000 years old and leads to one conclusion.
To have all these shells here, we must have had a lot of rain falling in the vicinity of this lake and a green Sahara.
Scientists fanned out across the Sahara to investigate other satellite images. They searched for any dips in its landscape that looked like they once held a body of fresh water.
So what was really exciting for me about those radar images that were produced by NASA, we can link this to the GPS, and we're finding evidence of lakes throughout the desert. And some of these lakes are massive.
3 different lake locations were confirmed by the presence of freshwater shells. The series of ancient lakes were so large, they've been dubbed mega lakes.
So this is the far shore of the mega lake. And there's just one of many lakes across the green Sahara.
When Drake added up the evidence of all the lake locations, he uncovered an astonishing fact.
Okay, so if this is North Africa here, and this is the edge of the Sahara Desert, so we're here in Tunisia with a mega lake here, and we know there's another mega lake here in southern Libya, an even larger one here in Chad. If they all meet their maximum size, they would have covered 10% of the Sahara.
That would have made them 3 times larger than the Great Lakes. What is now the biggest desert on Earth was once home to some of the planet's largest bodies of fresh water. Sudden changes in climate have been connected to everything from volcanic activity to meteors hitting the Earth. But climate researcher Peter Domenical had a hunch this wasn't the first time it had happened. He turned to his archive of deep ocean cores.
Our approach was to use deep sea sediments as this continuous tape recorder, if you will, of past climate change in Africa.
By looking at the levels of desert dust in cores dating back hundreds of thousands of years, he discovered the Sahara had changed more than once.
When we first collected these measurements, I really kind of almost fell back in my chair, because what we saw was there are many switches like this in the climate system.
To explain these regular dramatic changes, Domenical looked beyond the Sahara to the rotation of the Earth itself. More specifically, small wobbles in the Earth's orbit around the Sun. The theory is that the wobble causes the Earth to tilt slightly. So the monsoons which drench southern Africa today shift up, pouring rain onto the dunes of the Sahara. Crucially, these wobbles occur every 20,000 years.
So there's this perfect one-to-one match between when Africa was wet and the stage of the wobble cycle. And this goes back millions of years.
Each time the rain belt moves up, the landscape is transformed and the desert turns green.
To me, the single most impressive thing about the Sahara is how small fluctuations in something as simple as a wobble in the Earth's orbit can lead to these really just totally dramatic changes in the climate of a region that's so large.
Scientists now had evidence of how and why the Sahara turned green. They knew that giant lakes covered much of the desert, but they had no proof they were connected. Were these vast, isolated rain pools or part of an interconnected river system, as suggested by NASA's radar images? Nick Drake gets word that in 2009, archaeologists have made an important discovery that supports the river theory. Stone tools found not far from the site of the megalake in Tunisia. The first step is to identify the shoreline of the ancient lake.
Ah, now looks good. So, we've got some freshwater mollusks.
These tiny shells are a good sign of the lake. Now he searches for what may have been drinking the water when the megalake existed.
We have what looks like a part of a jawbone of a small herbivore. You can see 3 teeth running along there. Some sort of gazelle.
So animals must have existed here in the desert when it was green.
Okay, so we've got a stone tool here. It's become blunted, and they've retouched it with a lot of very fine flakes off the edge. The fact that we've got stone tools and we've got dead animals suggests hunting. And this was the animal that had been hunted. And then we've got water, so people sitting around a water hole waiting for animals to come to drink and then killing them, eating them, leaving them behind.
It's an important find. A Stone Age tool shows people lived on the shore of this ancient lake. And 90,000 years ago was a turning point, not just in the story of the Sahara, but in the history of humanity itself. Sometime between 80 and 120,000 years ago, modern humans started the long journey out of Africa. No one knows for certain what route they took. The prevailing view is that the Sahara was impassable, so humans left East Africa and traveled to the coast, then crossed a land bridge into the Arabian Peninsula. But Drake suspects that if the megalakes were fed by a river system, it would have created a green corridor across the burning sands.
So our ancestors could have followed these river systems, gone round the lakes, followed the next river system, round the next lake, and the next river system and the last lake, and then they've been in North Africa, and it'll be simple for them to just move out. The lake is a good story. The rivers plus the lake is a very concrete story.
To find proof of his theory, Drake heads to one of the few areas in the desert where water still flows, an oasis. He finds a small spring that shelters a valuable clue.
Caught some. Great. Cichlid fish. Nearly all cichlid fish are found south of the Sahara Desert. This particular type of cichlid is the only example north of the Sahara Desert.
This cichlid bears a strong resemblance to its closest relative that lives in Lake Tanganyika. But this lake is almost 3,000 miles away on the other side of the Sahara.
So the big question is, how did it get here? And the most obvious answer is that it swam across the green Sahara. Modern humans, who could live in lots of different types of environments, would have presumably found it very easy. A darn sight easier than this fish.
These rivers and lakes were not to last. The door slammed shut on the green corridor. But scientists now know that the Earth's wobble makes the Sahara like a pendulum. It goes from wet to dry every 20,000 years, like clockwork. The investigation has now revealed two clues to how these wobbles affected the Sahara. Freshwater shells dating back 90,000 years prove the desert was once covered by giant freshwater megalakes. A cichlid fish shows the Sahara was crossed by a river that created a corridor of life across the sands. But scientists still needed concrete information about how rapidly these changes occurred. Then, an Egyptian archaeologist made a stunning discovery in the Libyan desert. An eyewitness account of the Sahara's last switch, the most dramatic climate change of the last 10,000 years. Scientists piecing together the history of the Sahara have uncovered a remarkable story. 40 million years ago, it was covered in ocean. 3 million years ago, the Sahara turned to desert. Since then, it has swung between grassland and wasteland every 20,000 years. Scientists now turn to the more recent geological past, the last 10,000 years, to discover how fast this giant desert can change. Investigators head to a valley deep in the Libyan desert. The first clue to unraveling the mystery is a small circle of stones.
This is essentially the foundation of a hut. It is unimaginable to see an actual house structure right there next to what is now nothing.
Hassan's discovery is striking evidence of human habitation.
The house structure consists of this circular foundation with upright standing blocks which are taken from the local bedrock. It would have made a semi-circular structure with probably skins and branches, and people would have used that as a shelter.
Hassan believes these huts could have housed a small community of around 50 people. Now he needs to know exactly when they lived here.
Ostrich eggshell beads.
These little ostrich egg beads are clearly human handiwork.
They use the eggshells to make ornamental beads cut into a circle so that a string can pass through. So they string these into bracelets or necklaces.
The eggshells the beads were made from are also here and provide the next clue.
The eggshells suggest, of course, that they were ostriches, and that's quite remarkable for this environment to have animals like that.
This was no nomadic tribe, but a settled farming community rearing animals for food. Hassan carbon dated the ostrich eggshell beads. The result? Just 7,000 years ago, the deadliest desert on Earth was home to both human and animal life. It's dramatic evidence of the last burst of green in the desert. A dip in the desert floor provides a clear sign that rain from the monsoon fell here.
What we have here is the evidence of a deep lake with mud deposited.
This mud indicates a body of water that could have supported a settlement of people.
When the lake is deep, as we can see from these layers here, then there would be a lot of vegetation, a lot of animals, and people would have a very good time.
At sites all across the Sahara, scientists have excavated similar evidence of life. The remains of elephants and gazelles, hippos and crocodiles. Remarkable cave paintings even show people swimming. Elsewhere, human bones have been found, carefully buried in what were lakeside graveyards. Analysis of these bones reveals they date from between 10,000 and 6,000 years ago. The question now for scientists was how quickly the Sahara changed from bountiful back to bone dry. Earlier, deep-sea cores had provided evidence of the moment the Sahara first turned to desert 3 million years ago, and of how, since then, a wobble in the Earth's axis has made it swing like a pendulum between desert and grassland. Now, climate researcher Peter Domenical's on the hunt for the Sahara's last switch from green to desert, one that occurred in the last 10,000 years. To a geologist, opening this core is like a portal back in time.
Wow, that's amazing. Much, much redder in the upper part of the core.
Laid down flat, every quarter-inch of sediment in the core represents 200 years. The color difference in the sediment is subtle, but to a practiced eye, it's a big clue.
When we split this core, what is surprising about it is that we see this really impressive color change, and it goes from this sort of darker green-brown color in this section of the core, which comes from the clay minerals that make up the deep-sea sediments. This bright red sediment actually comes from the wind-blown dust that's coming off the Saharan desert. As you move along this core, you can see this color maintains itself further up and up in the core. So right now we're about 7,000 or 8,000 years ago. Boom, here is the drying of the Sahara. You can put your finger on it in this core right here at 5,500 years ago.
Crucially, the proximity of these two layers reveals how quickly the switch happened.
The transition from a very well-watered, wet Sahara that was completely vegetated to one that was much, much drier, that climate transition in this core occurred within 1 or 2 centuries.
Scientists knew that the Sahara was an ever-changing environment. Now, for the first time, they had a sense of just how fast it changed. As the Earth wobble shifted the rain belt away, the return to desert was swift and deadly.
These transitions would have happened almost on a generational timescale, that one generation after the next would have realized that where they're living is no longer sustainable.
High above the ruins of the lake settlement, Fakhri Hassan has discovered a cave he believes was important to the Saharan people during this sudden change in climate. Perhaps it holds eyewitness clues to what happened.
When I first came into the cave, the sand was as high as this level, and I had to crawl in because the sand had covered the whole area. Well, this wind-blown sand cannot form when the desert is green.
Buried in the sand was the first clue, some perfectly preserved animal droppings.
So these animal droppings don't only tell us about the climate at the time, but they also are excellent materials for radiocarbon dating, which allow us to date the final event of the drying of Sahara.
These goat droppings, covered in sand, reveal a time when a farming community was overwhelmed by desert. Hidden in the back of the cave is a clue that confirms people sought shelter here.
The cave has a very interesting feature, which is the prints of hands. So this is excellent evidence of the people that lived here.
The next clue suggests that around them, the Sahara was beginning its relentless transformation into desert.
Well, here we see a very interesting drawing with these long lines. This represents a cloud with rain coming down. Rain was becoming very scarce at that time, and they would have used this cave to pray for rain.
But with the monsoon now several thousand miles south, their prayers could not be answered.
Well, this cave must have been a very important sacred place for these people at a time when things were getting really bad.
Eventually, despite these rituals, the force of this change was so great, they had no choice but to leave.
Here in this cave we have the sand, and we have the handprints, which is the last message left by the Saharan population.
The story of this cave started with a tilt in the Earth's axis that stopped the rain falling on the Sahara. What must have seemed like a never-ending drought would, in just 200 years, turn a gentle, fertile region the size of the United States into a brutal, searing wilderness, the wasteland we see today. This would be the biggest environmental upheaval of the last 10,000 years. Those that could must have migrated east to their closest source of water, the valley of the Nile, a beacon of green in the vast desert.